All right. And with that, it's time to kick off the EcoCast here with our first presenter. I'm excited to welcome Michael Lyon, who's a senior systems engineer for enterprise accounts at Scale Computing. Hey, Michael, it's great to have you on.
Hey, thanks, David. Great to be here.
Excellent. Well, take it away.
All right. Well, good morning and or afternoon, depending on where you may be. It says Michael Lyon, but you can just call me Mike. Today, I want to talk about really life after VMware, um, and thinking about different ways we can approach virtualization, different ways we can approach and solve for infrastructure, right? Um, we've got a couple of polls and a lot of information from customers that I want to share. But before we get into that, just to give you a little bit background on me and also on Scale as a company. I joined Scale in 2011. The company was founded in 2008. We started out with a scale-out storage product that we intended to build into our hyper-converged infrastructure stack, which we launched in 2012. And since then, we've worked to build a large network of both customers, really across the globe in a variety of different verticals, retail, manufacturing, traditional core infrastructure, and also working to build and curate a nice partnership, both in the hardware and software space that allows us to really deliver not just a product, but an entire ecosystem, solving for data protection, VDI, containers, really everything from soup to nuts as far as infrastructure is concerned, and really providing it in a way that is more efficient overall. And what I mean is it's more efficient in terms of the acquisition cost. The overall barrier to entry is substantially lower, being more efficient in terms of delivering more resources for your workloads. We have a very lightweight platform, and it's really designed to be extremely highly available and reliable, right? To minimize the amount of disruptions, minimize the amount of threat vectors, just to provide a more reliable product overall. I don't normally jump on the meme train, but this caught my eye. Our CEO put it together, and for a long time, the old adage was no one ever gets fired for buying IBM. That eventually became no one ever gets fired for buying VMware. But really, it was just interesting because over the years you hear, I'm going to stick with the company that's not going to get bought out. And now, after the May 2022 announcement, we all know what's happened since then. Everything is changing, and we really want to talk about what that's going to mean. But to talk about the data I was referencing earlier, we did two different surveys, both in 2021 before the initial acquisition announcement, and then again in 2023, really to get a feel about what happened afterwards. But we wanted to understand what were some of the pain points about managing a traditional virtual infrastructure, right? And we're using VMware, but the same could be said for Hyper-V or any of the traditional 3-2-1 host plus SAN and network type deployments. Number one is the complexity. Like I mentioned, there's already three parts there. When you're dealing with shared storage that can be presented and managed in a variety of ways, you're dealing with updating and the care and feeding of your physical hosts. That's probably tackled outside of your actual infrastructure layer, right? And this adds downtime. This adds management pain points. This makes it more difficult to solve for solutions when you have vendors that may be pointing at one another. And also makes it more challenging to do software updates, making sure that you're deploying a package that's in consistent and in congruence with everything else that's in the stack that needs to be updated. And it adds pain points. The average time, 12 to 13 hours of downtime, or excuse me, of management overhead per week, just staying up to date with patches. And then, like I mentioned, physical hosts, we've got storage, we've got networking that's requiring additional fluencies, additional certifications. And ultimately, this adds up to a less efficient and overall less affordable product. And that can be thought of as the V tax. That's kind of what's been coined as the way to express all the overall capital expenditures as well as human expenditures that we use to manage our environment. Again, it's not targeted at VMware, but it's just trying to find out, hey, there are efficiencies. Um, but what did the customers really say? And really, the top four concerns started with downtime. Um, the downtime increased between the two survey intervals. So 5 hours more downtime in 2023 than in 2021. Some of this has to do, we feel, with organizations are trying to get more life out of their hardware. Decisions for replacements may have been pushed for capital reasons or any other internal reasons, but we're trying to get more life out of our investment, more runway out of our hardware. But this can impact downtime, especially when you're dealing with hardware-related outages going beyond just the typical planned maintenance of software updates. And the average downtime event was about 7 hours, so almost a full working day. Some businesses have done a good job of quantifying what that downtime can cost. Some haven't, but it can easily reach 6 to 7 figures in cost, depending on what your business is doing, right, and how dependent you are on that infrastructure. Beyond that, the overall investment and what the value you're getting back is not meeting the expectations. I think this has started to get worse over time, as we noticed in the survey, as the licensing models changed and became a little bit more aggressive, especially as we get more core dense processors. All the companies want to maximize the amount of licensing revenue they can get from that. And that really substantially impacts the overall value and ROI that you get, especially when you're having to pay more to license the same physical footprint when you're already having to take into account the upstream licenses of Microsoft and Oracle, for example. So a greatly diminished value, even compared to the 2 years we've taken the survey. Downtime and complexity, again, like I mentioned, it was around 13 hours in 2021. That jumped up to almost 17 hours, so almost a 33% increase. So that's more time you're spending downloading and managing and updating, applying software packages, dealing with security vulnerabilities as those get pushed out. Beyond that, in both instances of the survey, 100% of the customers needed to call support and services at one point. On that first slide, there was one of the bullets where we talked about our net promoter score of 91. For anyone who tracks that, you know that's a great score. As an example, Apple's, who's considered world-class in terms of customer support and experience, they trend around 60 to 62. So a 91 is outstanding. We wanted to make it so that when you have to call support, that is an enjoyable experience. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but support's a huge part of the product, so that if you contact us, we want to make sure that experience is good. But in any event, 100% of the customers surveyed said they needed to interact with support at some point. The other thing that's up there is the corporate concerns. What's going to happen to me, to my licenses? VMware has been very transparent in the fact that they're going to split off some of their divisions, specifically the end user computing. So what's that going to do to the hundreds of thousands of Horizon and View users that are out there? And also, what's that going to do for support, right? Where is that going to stay? How is that going to be affected? And only in recent weeks, as we know, it's been globally approved. So the acquisition has been finalized. VMware has already started making moves as far as cost-cutting measures and reorganization with layoffs. And when they first announced this last summer, they were very transparent, and also the fact that they were going to be focusing on their top 600 customers, which they said generated about 80% of their revenue. And what does that mean for the other balance of customers, which probably constitutes numerically a much larger portion of the market? So the acquisition drove uncertainty. It drove some questions. And our survey results gave us some insight into the fact that we want to get more reliability. We want to have something that doesn't require as much human intervention. It's going to minimize the impact on support and operations. That's just going to be overall giving us more value for the business, right? Value is also hugely important. What am I getting in terms of resources that I pay for? When I buy a host with X amount of terabytes, X number of cores, and X amount of storage, what percentage of that host gets devoted just to stand up the lights, right? To run my vCenter instances, my SCCM hosts. What do I have to do to run that? And that really impacts value, because when you're losing 25 to 30% of your host capability to the underlying supporting layer, that really impacts how you have to size, how much you're buying up front. And that also adds complexity, right? Because maybe we have to introduce additional layers of storage or additional storage vendors to provide tiering capabilities. Maybe we want to add and grow with different hardware specifications for a newer, larger project. Is that going to impact the ability to grow? And then from a corporate standpoint, how is the licensing, and more importantly, how is the support going to change, and how is that going to be impacted over the years? And really, that gives us an opportunity to provide a product that is more highly available. Right? Availability is important. I don't want to have to become fluent in another storage protocol or relearn how clustering is done. I want to have something that is natively highly available, right? Because that means it's simple to use. I don't have to learn new consensus protocols. I can just log into a web portal and very easily start clicking and deploying virtual machines. I'm not using thick clients or dealing with a different interface for my storage layer and compute and infrastructure layer and network layer. And having all those in one stack in a hyper-converged deployment like Scale means it's a lot more efficient. Our entire platform sits inside of 4 gigs of RAM or less. And while this means we can operate on very small platforms, giving you the ability to run on something as small as a NUC or a small form factor device, but that also means on your more traditional x86 servers, when you deploy a host with a terabyte of RAM, again, we're only going to be using 4 gigs. The remainder of that memory is all for your workloads. We're not consuming any for our platform, for our management layer, for our hypervisor, or anything. And like I mentioned before, scalability, talking about complexity, when I need to grow, what does that upgrade path look like for me? Is that going to be a rip and replace? Is that going to be, an expensive, substantial upgrade, or can I incrementally grow and add nodes as needed, right? And scalability is hugely important, especially in physical hosts and storage. It's often difficult to grow organically without matching the CPU type and architecture or a storage layout. And that can provide challenges when you're adding a host with newer CPU capabilities, right? And we start talking about managing VM generations. And it forces us to really think at the day one when we're purchasing everything. I need to overbuy, and I try and have to forecast what am I going to need in the future. And what this leads to is a lot of times we have to overbuy what we think we need for projects or for resources that may or may not ever materialize. With Scale, again, it's in our namesake, but when you grow, you can add existing hosts, even if it's a newer CPU type. We'll handle that integration. You can add hosts that have more cores, more RAM, more storage. It doesn't have to be the exact same as what you've deployed today as well. So it really provides a lot of different avenues for growth into the future. So what is Scale? Our core product is what we call Scale Computing Platform, which consists of 2 different components. HyperCore is our main infrastructure product. So that's what's running your legacy VMs, your applications, your workloads, your containers. That is your infrastructure layer. That is where we provide hypervisor, built-in storage, built-in management capabilities, as well as data protection and disaster recovery. HyperCore is software that runs on any x86 hardware. In this image, we've got Intel NUCs showing you that we can scale down very small, but that can also scale up to a large 2U host with 2 terabytes of RAM and 96 cores, and everything in between. But we provide an on-premises private cloud. That's what I like to describe Scale as, giving you the ability to very quickly stand up and deploy a a scale stack in less than 30 minutes. And after that, you're deploying VMs, you're creating workloads. The other side of that component is Fleet Manager. So managing a single scale environment is very simple, but if you want to manage multiple scale deployments and you start to scale that up into dozens or hundreds or thousands, Fleet Manager is a cloud portal that provides operational oversight over everything. It also provides connectivity. It provides zero touch provisioning. So I'll talk about how that works, but it's making it a plug and play out of box experience, um, as well as data management, observability, and we can drive automation from within there as well. Fleet Manager, the other beauty of it is it's very portable, it's extensible, it's going to run on any device, any mobile browser or operating system. And from within Fleet Manager, we get actual access and visibility into the remote sites, as well as zero touch provisioning and deployment. Deployment velocity, I like to use that term. It's something that I think gets overlooked. And whether you're standing up a small environment or bringing on thousands of VMs, we wanted to make that deployment to get to the point where I can start creating workloads to be as seamless as possible. We wanted to get rid of the notion of having to spend a couple of hours configuring your physical hosts and setting up the local storage, getting them then to a point where you can install a hypervisor. We wanted to make it plug and play. So with zero touch provisioning, what it allows you to do is essentially eliminate the need for smart hands at the remote site. Once the servers are plugged in and connected to power and network, and the only assumption we have is that there's DHCP and that they can reach fleet.scalecomputing.com. If those two provisions are in place, it'll automatically reach up to Fleet, pull down its configuration, assemble itself into a cluster, and then from there, it can also start pulling down VMs and containers and populating itself with workloads. So really making it a plug and play, I'll use an iMac, that type of experience where you're just connecting power and network. The actual provisioning of the cluster is all driven centrally, and it's all automated. No need for keyboard and monitor. No need to send technicians or deploy smart hands to get access to that. Once the cluster is online and deployed, getting visibility into that is hugely important. And every other management tool, whether it's log gathering or a screen sharing tool, there's an underlying assumption that there's a network in place, right? There's already a VPN, there's already an SD-WAN, that there's somehow connectivity from point A to point B. With Secure Link, that's not required. As long as the remote site has internet access and can reach Fleet Manager, we can have visibility not just to the remote cluster, but to the actual VMs, workloads, and containers themselves. Again, without requiring an additional VPN, without requiring you to license any other software technology, we're giving you that visibility, we're giving you that reach. And over the past 11 years, we've worked really hard to build a relationship with customers, with partners, with vendors. And we've worked hard to build our score up. CRN recently gave us the highest score ever achieved in any vendor, really in any segment, but this was particularly in hyperconverged infrastructure. And for the past 5 years, we've really been on the forefront, receiving those awards, leading those categories. But ultimately, Scale is just a hyperconverged platform that's an alternative to VMware. It is an all-in-one platform. It's software that runs on x86 hosts, but it's designed to be simple, an on-premises private cloud where it's managed from a web portal, where it's providing all of the autonomous management that you don't have to be involved in, making sure that temperature values are checked, that smart errors are managed. All of that is AI driven on the back end. And it's all managed from a single vendor, right? So when you contact Scale for support, we're not going to deflect you to Lenovo or Dell or Supermicro or the underlying hardware vendor. We're going to solve that problem when you contact us. And it's all within one software license. We don't have different tiers, different stacks. We don't have different fences really to lock you out of certain features. We really want to give you the entire product in its entirety when you're deploying scale. So I'm going to do a quick demo here with the 5 minutes I've got, and I'm going to show the what Fleet Manager looks like. So this is Fleet Manager. In this point, this is a smaller demo environment that we've got for the SE organization, but we're managing, in this case, 28 systems. So across the top, we're getting immediate visibility to those sites that are going to need some sort of attention, as well as the sites that are disconnected. Just want to talk about connectivity to Fleet Manager real quick. Fleet Manager is not a witness. This is not providing any type of orchestration for fault tolerance or high availability. So if a site is disconnected, if there's a fiber cut in the area, if it can't reach Fleet Manager, by no means are we in jeopardy, right? It just means we don't have any visibility there. We can see that there are some conditions, as we call it, that we would need to investigate. In this case, we can also look at the firmware deployments that we have out, kind of a DNA map of what's there. But if I wanted to actually troubleshoot and drill into a remote site, in this case, I can see my cluster view. These are my 28 sites. We can also manage and start firmware updates from within here. But if I needed to actually drill into a particular cluster, in this case, I wanted to access one of my cluster container VMs. I'm going to share this tab here. Fleet Manager brought me back to a remote site. I can type the password incorrectly. And now I'm actually seeing the 3 hosts. So these are individual VMs that are running. This is my small Kubernetes test environment. If I needed to get further visibility into that remote site, I can access that individual VM's console. So all from within Fleet Manager, all from within one management context and one authentication session. Go back here to Fleet Manager. From provisioning standpoints, I talked about zero-touch provisioning. Our software is integrated into the platform, so it's delivered as an appliance, which means we only have to configure the network layer. So when it comes to provisioning new sites, all we have to do is set aside some very basic information that we would have ahead of time. Then we can associate the hardware to this particular site. And in this case, Fleet Manager also acts as kind of an ad hoc asset tracking database. So we can see every piece of hardware that's associated with our account. Even if it hasn't been shipped yet, we can still pre-configure that. We can set aside this particular cluster's configuration. I've already got one built here, so I'll look at it. In this case, we can drill in and see, okay, this is the configuration payload. Once these nodes are plugged in and connected to network, again, the very simple requirements in that, as long as they can reach API and broker.scalecomputing.com, they'll pull down their configuration and assemble themselves into a cluster. From there, we can also start driving the upstream configuration of bringing in workloads. We've got a number of ways to drive that automation. We have our own REST API. We have a very robust and complete Ansible collection to give you the ability to manage deployments and manage the actual VMs at scale. But lastly, from a secure link connectivity perspective, like I mentioned, if you did need to get to the individual workload without having to traverse the cluster, from within Fleet Manager, we can also get to individual VMs. So I can click on that console tab, and it's going to take me actually to that particular VM console. Again, no need for me to jump into any other management plane. I didn't have to disconnect and reconnect my VPN to send me to a different network. Really was just designed to bring the management all encompassing into one single pane of glass. And I really hate that cliche, but it really works here. I'm going to go back to screen here. Again, secure link, bypassing the need for any of the complexity, bypassing the need to set up and manage remote networks. And it just plays into the idea of deployment velocity, right? Being able to deploy many sites at once without having to devote days or potentially weeks, but in any event, many hours to just standing up and deploying a single node, a single cluster, without having to go into a variety of different management contexts there. So I'm approaching the end of my time. I want to make sure I leave some room for questions here. Um, there's any options, from a demo perspective, we have a lot of ways to get scale into your hands. We have a publicly accessible demo lab. If you wanted to just try one out remotely. The other beauty of our software is that because it can run on something as small as an Intel NUC, even if you wanted to test from a small deployment perspective, it's not going to consume a lot of resources in terms of rack footprint or network ports. It really is designed to get you up and running as quick as possible, get you familiar with the product.
Awesome. Well, really cool demo. Really great presentation, Michael. We got a lot of great questions coming in. I do want to remind everyone out there to make sure you respond to the poll. I see many of you already have. We appreciate that. We'll just keep that poll up while we take your questions. Let's see. So many questions. Not sure where to start. Michael, one of them they're asking about, Marty wants to know, is Fleet Manager an add-on, or is that a kind of a standard feature with Scale?
It's a separate product, so you can buy our core platform product and then license Fleet Manager separately.
Got it. Okay.
But
And
it's
then
yeah, it's
go ahead.
very inexpensive and it's designed to scale up into the thousands. Yeah.
Got it. Let's see. Another good question here. John wants to know about, can you backup scale at the hypervisor level using third-party apps?
Yes, we do have host integration. So if you wanted to do agentless backups, that's an option as well. We also have
Right.
our own snapshot and replication to get those VMs protected at the VM level.
Nice. Steve wants to know, does Scale require proprietary servers to run on, or can we bring our own equipment?
For the most part, we have an HCL. So if it's one of our common builds, we do have the ability to get software in your hands. Traditionally, it is bought and delivered as an appliance, though, but we're using, for the most part, commodity servers that are probably in your data center today.
Excellent. Um, Steve also wants to know, does Scale have a solution that's similar to VMware vSAN?
So we have our storage engine built in, and we don't license it separately. So we wouldn't be able to provide Scribe, which is our storage layer, as a storage platform for VMware. It is built in, so we really have solved that problem by using our own storage technology.
Nice. Nice. Let's see. Here's another good one. What challenges do modern organizations face, and uh, how can these alternative paths forward address or mitigate these challenges? What do you see, or how do you see Scale helping companies in the future with the challenges they're facing? Kind of looking at a bigger picture.
Yeah, well, there's two things that are happening. Number one, everyone's trying to refresh and maximize the amount of investment, right? They want to get 5 to 7 years out of their hardware, and that means a more efficient product. At the same time, we're also seeing a huge modernization slash digital transformation undergoing, where companies are leaning into CI, CD, DevOps mentalities, transitioning legacy applications to containers. And we help solve for that by providing an environment that can be directly connected to your development workflows, to your development pipelines, essentially giving you those cloud-like resources for large scale testing, large scale automation, large scale deployment, but giving you those options in your data center, right, on prem without having to deal with the variability of cloud costs.
Excellent. So it's not just for VMs.
Correct. Yeah,
Nice.
VMs, that's obviously, that's what I think of when I say legacy applications, but we can run VMs and containers side by side and give you a nice way to, have a time capsule to run your existing workloads in parallel while you're developing and transitioning to, a microservices platform.
Got it. And then maybe the last question, since I know we're kind of running out of time here, and that is, I'm sure there's companies out there that maybe they think, they're using VMware. Maybe the only people they know are using VMware. Do you have case studies of companies out there who have successfully adopted Scale and kind of documented the benefits that they've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can imagine, having been around since 2012 and VMware being the market leader, that's constituted a lot of our business is transitioning from VMware. So we have a number of ways to accomplish that, whether that's migration tools or even just browsing a data store and bringing those disks onto Scale. We want to make it very easy, and we've got a number of case studies in a variety of different verticals.
Excellent. All right. Well, I see like 20, plus more questions out there for you in the electronic queue. If you don't mind, maybe you can stick around and answer some of those folks electronically. But I'm afraid we're out of time in our live Q&A. A really great presentation, cool demo. Thanks for being on the event today, Michael.
Thanks for having me.